Okay, now that we've set up identity on our API, we're now going to configure this on our client side. But before we get started, what we'll find is that we've broken our client-side application because we're currently, of course, not sending up our token to go and get the activities. So what we'll do, just for the short term, we'll go back to our activities controller, and what we'll do, and we've got some unused imports here which we can clean up, but what we'll do inside our activities controller, we're just going to allow anonymous, and we'll bring in ASP.NET Core authorization so that our client app continues to work whilst we're developing our login. It'll just make our lives a tiny bit easier. And if we go back and just refresh our page, now we'll find that our activities load once again. We will, of course, throughout this section, get to a point where we do send up a token so that we can receive these activities as authenticated users. But first of all, let's start building out the client-side login and registration. And what we'll do inside our client app, inside the source folder, inside features, we're going to add a new feature folder and we'll call it users. And what we'll do is we'll create a new file and we'll call this one loginform.tsx. And what we'll do is we'll just create a simple form to allow us to test our login functionality. So we're going to import React from React, and we'll say export default function, and we'll say login form, and we're going to return, and we're going to make use of Formic once again. Of course, we have Formic available now, and this makes our form generation significantly easier than not using Formic. So we're going to give this some initial values, and we'll do it directly inside here. So we'll open up double curly brace so that we pass this as an object, and we're going to need an email, which we're going to set to an empty string, and the password, which we're also going to set to an empty string. And we also need to provide the onSubmit function here, and all we'll do for now is just log out the values that we get from our form and say console.log values, just to make sure that our form is working successfully. Now we're going to use the render props pattern once again to pass down what we need to our actual form, and all we need at the moment is the handle submit that we get from Formic. And we'll open the arrow and open some parentheses, and inside here is going to go the form. Now we want the Formic functionality, so we're going to bring form in from Formic rather than semantic UI, just as we did before. So we're going to get the form and bring this in from Formic, not the one from semantic UI. And we'll add the closing tag. And because this is not the one from semantic UI, we need to give this a class name and set this to UI form. And then we can specify the onSubmit, what we want to do when we submit the form, and we're simply going to call handle submit. And we'll also turn off autocomplete, otherwise it will be annoying. And inside our form, we'll add our text inputs. So we'll bring in my text inputs, and we need to give this a name property, and the first one's going to be email. And we also need to give this a placeholder, and we'll set this to email. And we'll copy this text input down, and the next one's going to be password, and the placeholder will be password. And we want to give this a type of password. But we didn't actually add the ability to choose a type inside our text inputs. Let's just open up this component, and what we'll do is we'll just add an optional type here and say type question mark, which is a type of string, so that we can also pass the type, which is going to be spread in our props object into our input here. So if we go back to our login form, the error has gone away. And what we'll also add is a button, and we'll make this a positive button, so it's green, and we'll give it some content, and we'll say login, and we'll give it a type equal to submit. And eventually this is going to be contained inside a modal. So what we'll do is we'll also make this fluid so it takes up the full width of its container. And like I say, eventually it's going to be a modal. This is not going to look great whilst we're testing this, but by the end of this section, it will be presented to the user in a modal rather than being redirected to this form directly. But for the time being, what we'll do is we'll just use the router to take us to this component so that we can test a login. So what we'll do is we'll add a root for this. So we'll go to our app.tsx, and inside the roots we'll just add, we'll call it a temporary root just to make life easy for testing, and we'll give it a root path of login, and the component we'll set to login form. And then what we'll do is we'll just go across to our home page, and we'll replace this link for activities, and we'll say take us to login, and we'll just change the content here to login. And what we should be able to do, if we go across to our application and go to the home page, then we can see our login button and we can see our login form. Like I say, don't worry how it looks at this moment in time. And all we want to do here is just make sure that we can click the button and receive the properties that we input into the form. And now we have a login form. What we'll do next is we'll take a look at creating the interfaces for the user objects, both for the login and registration, and for the object that we're going to get back from the API as well.